Patrick Waugh recently called out Anthony Duclair for his poor play on the ice. And while this did get a lot of attention from NHL media, nobody saw what was coming next, as Anthony Duclair has now taken a leave of absence from the New York Islanders. We're going to break down what that means for the Islanders in this episode of Islanders Digest and really talk about what's going on in this situation, because it's really confusing. We obviously don't have all the details, but from what we can see as fans, this is definitely concerning for the New York Islanders and for Anthony Duclair. We're going to break that all down in this episode of Islanders Digest. But before we get into that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be one of our first 100 subscribers. If you're an Islander fan and you want more Islanders content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. With that, let's get right into this news today. Early on in the morning, we got reports that Anthony Duclair was not practicing. We didn't quite know what that meant until we got comments from Patrick Waugh discussing what is going on. And he said, obviously, you saw that Anthony was not at practice today. This morning, Anthony and I had a very good conversation, a very positive one, and Anthony asked me to take some time off and reflect. So obviously, I agreed to that and will give him time that he needs. And that is pretty much the only update we have on this story so far. We haven't gotten a comment from Anthony Duclair, and there hasn't been any further comment from Lou Lamoriello, and we don't really know what's coming next. But this is definitely really concerning and not really what I expected to happen after Patrick Waugh called Anthony Duclair out. Now, I knew there would be some discussion on whether or not Duclair would be playing the next game after Patrick Waugh said he was lucky to be in the lineup and called him god-awful. The words that Patrick Waugh used in this press conference were harsh. However, this reaction from Anthony Duclair is very surprising, and I don't quite know what it means next for the New York Islanders. Anthony Duclair is not a player that you signed on a one-year deal. He is here for the New York Islanders for the next 3 seasons. He signed at $3.5 million, and I don't think this is quite at the extent where I know some people on Twitter were talking about maybe this means they're going to mutually agree to terminate this contract. I don't think that's where this goes, but who knows? Because what really does he have to take time to think about? Now, I don't really want to get into speculating on what's going on in Anthony Duclair's life and if there's anything going on there, mentally, anything like that. But it's definitely really interesting that his response to being called out by his coach is to take a step back and reflect. And I do really want to kind of talk about that, because typically the reaction you see from a player when they're called out for playing bad, and we've seen this a couple times in the NHL, and sometimes it can get a little heated, and it does bring a lot of attention that you typically don't want on a team. But we've seen coaches like Sheldon Keefe called out players, and the response is normally they come back the next day and play hard. I mean, with the Islanders, with Pierre Engvall, Patrick Waugh has been very vocal when Engvall has not played well. And Engvall's response was really taking time to do what Patrick Waugh wants and get him to compliment the player again. Because Patrick Waugh, as we've seen, he's not a coach like John Tortorella, where he seems to get on a player's bad side, and once the player's on his bad side, he just never gives him another chance. Patrick Waugh has shown, especially with Engvall, that you can frustrate him and he will not play you. But if you start to show him what he wants to see, he will reward you. I think he's a very fair coach in that sense. And I will say, I think maybe his media comments were inappropriate. Sure, you could have said that Anthony Duclair was not playing well, not giving you what you need, because he hasn't. We're going to go into his stats. He has not been good this season. And to call him god-awful was probably, not probably, it was definitely a heat of a moment, poor decision on his behalf. But still, for Anthony Duclair to take a leave of absence here, that is really shocking. It's definitely not what I expected to happen. I thought at most maybe he'd be scratched a game, let Matt Martin play. And I'm just going to go into the lineup really quickly now. That is what is happening as of now. Matt Martin is coming back in the Islanders lineup, and I don't think this is a positive story at all. I'm actually really concerned for the relationship between Anthony Duclair and the New York Islanders. But one thing I will say is it is nice to see Matt Martin getting back in the lineup. This is almost definitely Matt Martin's last pro season in the NHL, and this will give Islander fans an opportunity to say goodbye to Matt Martin, a player who has been a fan favorite for so many people, a big inspiration, and such a good person off the ice, involved in charity events and all that. Islander fans love Matt Martin. I love Matt Martin. It's good to see him get another opportunity in the lineup. It's very unfortunate that this is why he got an opportunity in the lineup. But yeah, at this point, that's really the only good thing you can really take away from this. Although this is definitely not a good story at all for the New York Islanders. And I think making it worse is this is a situation that is now going to have a lot of media attention moving forward. There already was going to be some attention on Duclair after he got called out by Patrick Roy, but if he came out, had a hard practice today, and then had a solid game against Minnesota tomorrow, I think this starts to kind of go away. That's kind of how these things go. I mean, Sheldon Keefe was in the news last week for making heated comments, and now that seems to be old news. Now this is going to be a story going on into the offseason, and we'll see if Duclair, if this is a 1 week leave of absence, if maybe it was just a day off from practice and he comes back for the next game or the game after that, or the Islanders only have 8 games left this season. So this is a thing where we're not going to see Anthony Duclair this season, and it's going to linger into the offseason. We have no idea. I don't want to speculate too much right now, but this is something we're definitely going to be covering on the channel in the next few days or weeks, depending on how long it drags on. And hopefully this does not drag on too long, because you don't want all this attention on something like this for the Islanders. It's definitely not a position you want to be in. And for the Islanders really trying to push for a playoff spot, I know at this point they're mostly out of the playoffs, but this is definitely not something you want to have going on in the locker room. A disagreement between a coach. I know Patrick Roy has said they had a good conversation, and I really hope that there was a good conversation. And I believe they did kind of come to some sort of peaceful agreement, whatever they talked about in this conversation. Because Patrick Roy, it's not like this is a player that he has just met this season. Patrick Roy has a long-time relationship with Anthony Duclair. He's actually the reason why Anthony Duclair came to play for the Islanders. So hopefully that relationship is not completely tarnished. We'll see what happens in the next couple days. Another thing I want to note with this lineup is Sipklov is actually finally getting a spot back on the second line. I do think, while it's, again, not good for the Islanders that Duclair is taking a leave of absence, we'll see what happens with that. It is good that Sipklov is moving back into the top 6, though. I don't think Sipklov is a fourth-line player. He did play very well on the fourth line. I will say he can play fourth liner if he needs to. He's not like one of these players where he's second line or bust. Like Siplikov can play some fourth line minutes. He plays hard. He checks hard. This is a guy who has top 6 potential. I mean, he has 31 points this season. It's good to see him getting another opportunity on the second line. A second line that frankly was awful with Anthony Duclair, as we will get into the stats. I understand there's a lot going on, and we will see if there is more to this story, especially considering that he is taking a leave of absence now. There might be more undercover here with what's going on between Patrick Roy, the Islanders, and Anthony Duclair. But the stats this season have been abysmal, frankly. He has 7 goals in 44 games. He has only 11 points in those games. And this is a player the Islanders brought in to be a second-line player and really complement Mathew Barzal and put up 60 points this season. Now, I understand Mathew Barzal has been hurt this season, and Duclair has also been hurt, and I definitely think an injury is a part of what's going on with his play right now. That being said, he is healthy enough to play on the ice, and 11 points in 44 games for a guy who you're expecting to be in your top 6 is just unacceptable. Now, fortunately, Anthony Duclair is not getting paid too much money at $3.5 million. It is a significant amount of cap, but at least it's a level where if Duclair does come back this season, because we don't know what's going to happen, there could be a mutual contract agreement, perhaps some sort of trade situation. We have no idea what is going to happen next in this story, and we won't know more until we get more information on why Duclair is taking leave of absence. Does he need time to just think about what Patrick Roy wants from his game, or is he deciding whether or not he wants to remain an Islander? We don't know that now. And we'll know more likely in the next few days, hopefully in the next few days, because if this goes, again, you don't want this to be a situation that lingers on halfway through the offseason. But yeah, if this is a situation where he's going to be coming back next season, you're going to need to see better. But like I said, talking about I got a little confused there. Getting back to his contract at making $3.5 million, this is not a player who needs to go back to scoring 50 points to be effective for the Islanders. I think if he can get back to a rate where he's scoring 30 points, 40 points, considering that he's only making $3.5 million, that could still be okay for the Islanders. But again, we don't know what's going to happen next. And another thing to note, and I don't want to put too much attention on this. I think some people put way too much emphasis on the fact that he's been on so many teams. But it's true. Anthony Duclair has played on a lot of teams in the NHL. He has been moved around a lot. And some people are now speculating maybe there's a reason that he's been moving around so much, and therefore it was a mistake for the Islanders to sign him on a 4-year contract. And to that I say we're going to have to see how this situation plays out. But I don't think Anthony Duclair moving around from team to team was just because he's an asset that you don't want around long term, especially with some of the teams that held him on in recent years. The Tampa Bay Lightning, Florida Panthers, these are both teams that were making the playoffs and playing good hockey. So, and the Florida Panthers wanted him around for a few years. They just didn't really have the money to hold on to him. And they had other players that they definitely wanted to hold on to as they're getting ready to make their cup. This was before they made their cup runs, but they were President's Trophy winning team in some of those seasons. So I don't think it's a situation where Duclair is this player that these teams are avoiding like the plague, but maybe it is something to note. I mean, Islanders are having issues with this player now, and he has been on, what is it, 9 teams? I think he can actually set a record for playing for the most teams if he plays on another team or two. We'll see what happens here. But yeah, this is definitely concerning. I also want to note here quickly, talk about Matt Martin's stats. Matt Martin is not going to add anything to the Islanders lineup, to be honest, at this point in his career. But it will be nice to see him play again, as I was talking about earlier. Love Matt Martin, and this is likely going to be his final send-off. He's 35 years old. As you can see, he only had 1 point this season in 24 games he played. He did look like he lost a step, but it'll be nice to see Matt Martin. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about this Duclair situation. What do you think happens next? Do you think him and the Islanders are able to come back to an agreement and he continues his next 3 seasons on the New York Islanders? Or do you think this is a situation where like he might be traded or even mutually agree to terminate his contract? I'd love to know your thoughts on this because there are really just so many thoughts that come to my head. I did not expect this to happen today. I was expecting to have good practice and everything go back to relatively normal. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Patrick Nilan. Let's go Islanders.